So we have got a couple of questions, some for Anya, some for Sarah, some that might apply to both of you. But Anya, first of all, we saw that you were just nominated as a Diversity Leader of the Year. And you have talked about how to learn about diversity, how to incorporate it in leadership. But what would you say make a good diversity leader on a day-to-day basis, besides all the big programs, but daily with your employees?
I think as a starting point, you need to know what you know and understand what you don't know, right? So the whole bias thing. I think unless you really understand the differences, you're not going to. I think once that whole diversity thing and bias thing starts resonating with you, you can't let go. Right? You see it everywhere. And I think so it's really about getting people trained so they see it, and once it clicks, and then there is no going back, right? I play golf, and when you're out playing golf and somebody does a really bad stroke or, normally in many kinds of sports, the negative things have female associations to it, right? So you would say it's a tøsepot, right? It's like, that was very tøset. And I was like, seriously, stop it. And it's even girlfriends. It's like, it's not tøset, it's just crap, right? It has nothing to do with gender. So I think once you start understanding it, and so for leaders, I think the first step is understanding your own biases now with gender and other things. Then once you do that, I think it comes. Then inclusion and trust is very important, because you can have as many females around the table, but if you don't have an inclusive environment where people can trust and be themselves, it's not going to help, right? So.
Okay. For you, Sarah, I think it's clear to everyone who's been seeing the live stream that you're very passionate about this subject. So where did it start from? Your own career or something that you have experienced, or where did you get the interest in this?
That's a very good question. Thank you for asking a personal question, because when I usually when I do this, I always get the same questions. So there might be a slightly long answer here. So I think a little similar to what you said, Anya, that I grew up thinking things were fixed. So there were no awareness around these issues. So I mean, I can't I can't touch that. Oh, it's really difficult. So I grew up not being aware of this, and I was told that I could do anything. And I remember, very defining moments. And my grandparents, I remember they actually supported this. That I would say, I'm amazing. Ja, soeverein. That was a thing I would say, but I think that was taken out of me. Not on purpose by people, but very early. I was a mathematical and chemist. I had mathematics and chemistry in high schools, and still I ended up at CBSES, but the softer, the philosophy program. So the way my whole career would develop was extremely, formed by me also unconsciously performing, what society expected of me. And I had no idea. I started by doing my PhD, and in my PhD, I decided that I would not, not write he about a leader, because I'm a woman, so I could do that. That's not a problem. I ended up writing they still. But that was the kind of argument I would hear myself, to my younger self, and I was in my 20s. And then now, again, back to whether this is taped or not. So I had a few personal experiences that we all have, which just made it very clear to me that both people in my social circles and my managers, I was told once not to wear dresses, and I've never had trousers on at work. So, many little kind of tiny things. So I don't think there was one defining moment. I usually say in my 20s, I was completely oblivious. In my 30s, I got, angry. And in my 40s, I just want to change shit. So I think it kind of came very, very without me knowing it. But I just got much of my ambition taken out of me, and I'm still called all of these things. And I really think it is problematic on so many levels. That's why now I'm wearing my little pin with Killjoy in my keychain. It says nasty and stuff like that. But I also think that I have reached a position where I dare to do it and I can do it, and I'm not sure I would have been able to voice it in a similar way as a PhD student in a very male-dominated area, in a business where you're so precarious work, where you're so dependent on what everyone thinks. Right now, I mean, and this is not a secret, if people don't like me, I can find a different job. So I'm not afraid of being, I don't think, it's more difficult to fire a professor, luckily. But I'm not afraid of that anymore. So that was a long answer.
But I think as many people would expect, for many women it does come from personal experiences somewhat, or at least personal observations that will get you into such a passionate field. And so some people has asked you as well, and you talked about that, what Sarah had said about female leaders being less likable or being called a bitch or be seen more as bitchy. And you said that you had experience with that, but do you feel as if it has been very present throughout your career, that it has been something that has affected you in your career?
I don't know if it's definitely affected, because I think everything that you experience in some way affects you. But I think it's probably energized and made me more passionate about the subject than not. I haven't been like put off by it. In the beginning, when I was younger, I felt very the whole justice and unfair thing of it. That it was unfair that I would be seen as being bitchy and bossy when I was just doing the same thing as my male colleagues, and they were just assertive, right? And I was emotional where they would be showing empathy, and they were just being more holistic leaders. And then I said, I can't really use that whole justice, fairness thing, because that's not going to help me. So I just let it go and just focused on something else. But it's been there, and it pops up from time to time. It definitely does.
And I think you are also especially in an industry that has a very high percentage of men throughout all levels. But why do you think that, especially the tech industry, you showed us a picture with when you Googled IT engineer, it was all guys, but do you think it's simply the narrative about the IT industry that keeps women out, or why do you think there are so few women?
Oh, it's definitely about the narrative of the industry. If you ask about IT, most would say that it's about sitting and coding in a dark room, right? And when you ask, and you actually have to go, we do a lot of things of going out to schools and do like coding classes with kids, and you have to do it in like the 4th, 5th grade, because otherwise it's too late. But if you go out and you talk to young girls in high school, and when they think about what they want to do, many of them are even younger than that. They want to work with people. They want to influence lives, and my argument would be that there's no other bigger way that you can influence lives than through the IT industry. You know, back to Corona, the cure, the virus, vaccine, everything would not be possible to find without IT today. It's the IT supercomputers that are crunching all of this data in a speed that we've never seen before, that will hopefully get us much faster to an answer than before. Medicine and health today is much more about IT than it is about actually the hands. Not that the warm hands are not important, they are, but there's so much more IT behind all of these things. But the way that we have done ads in the past have been talking to men. The way that we have been talking about the industry have been appealing to men and not to women. So we're using a lot of the things of thinking about how we do ads. We're using tools like Textio and other tools that are just like looking at your advertising and the job postings and telling you whether you're using feminine or masculine kind of like attracting words. And a lot of the postings we would have done in the past would have been, hey, join the largest, the biggest, the like fastest industry. Not necessarily the words that girls that want to work with people would do. But if you did the same posting and talked about, you know, the miners in Cuba that was stuck underneath the earth for 3 months and couldn't get up, and the only communication they had with their families were through IT, and how you can actually, you know, help sustainability and, you know, there's so many things. So if you start talking about that and change the narrative, then we can get more girls to join. But we haven't been good at it in the past.
Because EIGE, the European Institute for Gender Equality, but EIGE anyway, they made some fantastic studies, and they have shown that in Denmark, so Danish girls, they have the biggest difference between their actual STEM skills and seeing themselves in a STEM job. And I think that is so worrying on so many levels. So we have among the highest STEM skills in girls 14 and younger, but the lowest percentage in entire Europe of girls who sees themselves in a STEM career. So for me, that is, obviously has nothing to do with competencies, but how we as a society reproduce, you know, gender stereotypes and norms. And not that we have necessarily to go back to the 70s, you know, where I was born, where everything was orange. Orange is a nice color, but I wore a lot of orange. And we all had the same haircut. That's not what I'm saying, but we need to get to a time where we can transgress those gender norms more so that we can get hold of those girls who are super good. Today also, girls in high school get better math grades than boys. So they have the skills, but somehow along the way, as I also said about my own story, you are kind of, you know, skewed into a different direction. And I always also recommend companies to work with, you know, not just high schools, but younger kids than high schools, because we need to get out to them. We also need to do that at CBS, because if you look at how our programs are skewed, I mean, it is insane how skewed it is. And we also know that the dropout rate is larger if there is less than 20% of one gender. So there is economy also for the business schools, for the universities, to make sure there is a gender composition. And why don't we have more men in HR? And why don't we have more women in finance? It has nothing to do with skills, but all also to do with what your parents expect from you, what does the high school counselor expect from you, and that is not bad will, it's, you know, again, bias.
And if I could just add to that, I think because I think it's on both sides. You said HR not having any males. I think it's super concerning that we don't educate more male lawyers coming out from law school today. That the majority are girls, and that we don't have any more men in kindergartens or in nurseries or in the younger classes as teachers. You know, I'm not saying it has to be like that, but if you have, like me, a son, and maybe one day he get married, he get kids, maybe he get divorced, if all of the divorce lawyers are going to be females, they will be biased too, right? We need to make sure that there is a balance in all things. So for me, it's we need women in IT, but we definitely need male lawyers and male nurses and other functions.
I think talking about balance in all the industries, I think one question that is probably not the first time you would have heard this question, but a lot of people would like to ask you, maybe in a bit provoking manner, is in all of this, do we discriminate against the white man then if we try to make it better for females or other?
I've had that question before. Yes, of course we do. is the kind of easy answer to that question. But if we take into consideration that with the biases we have now, the discrimination is skewed so that if we look at opportunities, equal opportunities is skewed maybe 80-20 or 60-40 or whatever. If we do whatever we can on a quite long-term basis, that if we're lucky, we will sniff at 50-50, we will not get there. And that also is the same case for men and paternity leave and, nurses, etc. So, yes, we do, but I usually also say when we discuss quotas or affirmative action, well, we use a deliberate tool to, make up for an unconscious, bias or an unconscious result. So, yes, of course we do. But right now, if we don't do anything, we will just discriminate women. So I had this question once from a person in the audience, and he said to me, so does that mean exactly this? Now that I'm white and I'm male, that my chances are, less? And I said, well, yes, in principle, it means that your chances lessen. But if we do this, it's still not 50-50. And don't you think that's fair? So what I always say to CEOs and directors, if they're going hardcore in on some of these more affirmative actions measures, then they need the narrative, speaking about narrative, they need the narrative about why they do this. Because if the narrative is that now it's just easier for women, so I've had that as well, so now women will take over the world because it's so easy for them to get a job. One of my oldest students, so she graduated last year, she was told by her HR manager a couple of months ago, an old white guy. So funnily enough, the kind of the managers in HR are usually men. So there's also the glass escalator metaphor. But she was told, it's going to be so easy for you to be CEO because you're a woman. I'm like, no, we're not quite there yet. So in a sense, yes, but we need the narrative around why this is important in order to do that.
And I think we need to remember it's not necessarily, in some cases it is a zero-sum game, but in most cases it's not, right? So, if we bring more talent to bear, we're all going to gain from this, right? So I think that's another, but I've lived with quotas in Dell. We have quotas, we have soft quotas, we have some hard quotas in some areas, and I do think that in obviously if I have a quota, it's not quota on that I have to hire, it's quota that I have to consider. And once you bring into the pipeline, into the interviews, to the panels, then you get to the point where you look at the best candidates at the end. And then for me, in the end, if my team, I look at it more as a team. I look at it as I'm hiring into the company or I'm hiring into the team. More than that specific position. So maybe they're equally good, but if my team will benefit from having a female or benefit from having a male or a younger or older, then I will put that into the composition of my team.
Right. And if I can just, we always want to add, but if I can just add to that, because a lot of people, particularly in Denmark, are afraid of saying that gender might actually be a competence. But of course, gender is a competence. If we have an all-female or a kind of female-dominated team, of course it's a competence if you're a man. And if we have an all-male team or a very male-dominated team, of course it's a competence because we know from research that it performs better. So I also think that there's a very distinct Danish fear of talking about gender as a competence, particularly among women, by the way. I don't want to be chosen, just because of my gender. Well, I mean, so many people have been chosen because of their gender for years. Why?
And that's why when I'm out talking, I particularly mention that I was chosen because I was a woman. And when I talked to my boss at that time today, and he's like, nah, that was not the case. I'm like, we both know that was the case. But that's okay. Because, then once you get in, you just have to kick ass and prove that you have a right to be at the table. But I was perfectly fine with being parachuted in because I was a woman. I wouldn't stay there for half a year in a environment like Dell if I couldn't deliver. They would have kicked me out faster because it is a business in the end, right? So.
And just to add to that, yes. So, because from quota research, we also know that even though there is a fear of being the quota woman for many, that effect actually doesn't last. So it actually vanishes, because once you're in there and you deliver, I mean, people actually don't see you as the quota woman anymore. So there's a much more a fear of quotas, particularly in Danish context, than they actually produce. And we are in Denmark one of the only countries, without, any kind of legislative quotas, also political quotas.
So I think, lastly, we've talked a lot about what to do if you are hiring someone, if you're a manager, if you're a leader. And I know you said, Sarah, that this is not something that we as individuals are responsible for. But for anyone who's on the live stream or people here today, both for you, Sarah, and for you, Anya, what do we do on a day-to-day basis that facilitate a better foundation for more female leaders? Anyone?
I mean, so when I said that culture is difficult and that we shouldn't take responsibility, it doesn't mean that we won't do it. When I have more time with organizations, I do a lot of what I call norm-critical exercises with them. That can be figuring out bias strategies, for example. What do we say as a collective? So for me, it's a lot about the collective responsibility. And I train organizations also in taking that collective responsibility. So I think there's a lot of things we can do. There is a lot of things we should do in order to change the work culture. Because as you also said, Anya, I mean, we can have 50% women, and if the climate is hostile towards women, then we don't bring out their competencies. And that is also the reason why I said, I want to flip the business case argument, because I want everyone to tap into all of their competencies. And that is done on an everyday basis, where we bias check our social events. That's a really good place to start. And now an American company, it is different than the Danish companies. So, I mean, in the Danish companies, there is not the same awareness to diversity, because that comes with the American company. So bias check the social events. I'm actually not even sure whether it's a story or true. I'm pretty sure it's still true. But we had a Christmas party a few years back, which was Bond, and that's fine because I love James Bond. But Bond and Bond babes, it's like it really is not very inclusive. Or when someone around the lunch table says something, or you had an example earlier about also sissy or something. Being the killjoy is something everyone can do. So what I often talk about is, I think people should not stand up for themselves. I mean, of course they do and they should, but we should stand up for others. So I think it's so important that we take a social, a kind of collective social responsibility for standing up for people when they say something in the lunchroom, even though you're considered the annoying one that kills the joy and the happy atmosphere again.
Yeah, so I agree. I've been, just to give you one anecdote, in my earlier days on a team where I was the only girl, and we were in northern Finland and having a sauna and skinny dipping exercise type of thing with the team. It's like, that's not really going to happen, right? As the only girl. But it wasn't really like... Nobody really just thought about it. We're in northern Finland. That's what they do in northern Finland. We're all going to go to the sauna, and then we're going to go and we're going to jump into the lake. And it's like, no, I'm not going to jump naked into the lake with my boss and my colleagues. That's just not going to happen, right? And then when there were that type of events, then and it continued actually a couple of years in different settings, but then there would be like... football, and then if you didn't want to do that, you could go and you could get a massage. But then you would be the only one having a massage while everyone else was playing football and having a beer, which you didn't want to be excluded for the group, right? So I've played a lot of football, and I'm not really good at it. So events checking, or bias checking your events. I think being conscious about things is something we can all do, and really call out when we see something happening that shouldn't be happening in this whole sexism debate that is right now as well. It's like stand up for each other, no matter what gender, and make sure that there's room and inclusiveness everywhere. I don't like the lean in, because I don't think that's the one thing that's holding women back, that we're not leaning in. But there is one thing we just need to be better at: articulating what we want to do. And some do, but not everyone does. And I think that when I look at my group of my managers, the guys are just still better at saying, hey, I want this, I want that, and most of the females are not. So I think that there is, and again, there's differences with females, but we just need to think about it and just articulate what we want a little bit better as well.
I experienced the skinny dipping in Sweden a couple of years ago. So it's not only northern Finland many years ago. It is, and I was also, it was me and a PhD student outside of the sauna, and we thought we were safe there, and then they come out naked. That was southern Sweden. But I also think that, there's a lot of things you can do on an everyday basis. We developed a concept called Gender Lab together with Kvinfo. And on CBS's website, you can actually download all of these exercises for free. So it's on cbs.dk/diversity. /Gender Lab. See, I am commercial. But the reason is that it's not difficult to do this. And again, the American companies are so used to the bias training. And as you said, and you said it so well, the bias that you found out you had is not the normal one, And I think that these exercises really make it visible what kind of privileges many of us have and how our different, various identity characters and identity categories intersect. So what I always do with the organizations I work with, and this exercise is included in this material, is I do an identity category exercise with them. And I use my own categories first as an example, because many of the rooms that I work with, they've never thought about their whiteness, their straightness, and their maleness. And it's super uncomfortable for them to, and I often get the question in Danish context, what is class? So people don't know what class is, and maybe CBS has a fault, because, most of the CBS students, and you probably come from the same area as me, we come from one area. So very socio-economic, similar group of people. So to force people to think about their race also when they're white, because we're racialized as white people as well, to think about the sexuality, also if they're straight. I often ask people, how many times a day do you think straight people come out at work? And people are like, what? It's like you do that 100 times, okay? So I'm not straight, which means that if I am telling people about my wife, it's also back to your question about when I figure stuff out, but never mind. But when I tell people about my wife, it's like, oh, that's a little much. So for example, when I teach MBA students, I have to tell them, because it's 90% men in the room, and it takes a couple of seconds, and then there are jokes about, oh, it must be nice to have so many men lining up for you to ask questions in the breaks and stuff like that. It's like, no, not really, not really. So, and then I am forced to come out. And I gave a keynote speak, it was live streamed and downloadable. So a couple of years back on Diversity Day, and our president, the former president, he was welcoming the kind of scene, and I had told him, please don't refer to the scissor again, so the figure that shows how few people kind of get through the career, because the pipeline problem, because it gets really dry, give your own examples. And he gave a really, really beautiful example of how he realized disadvantage because he met a gay person. But then he said, but I don't know any lesbians. And I was thinking, shit, I'm giving a keynote in 2 seconds on diversity and inclusion. Do I have to say something? And I was like, I have to, in a sense. So I came out for the first time in my workplace on live stream, and then since then I've led the Pride, and now I'm the company lesbian, and I can't get out of that role, and I will be that person before I'm anything else. Just like your female leader or female professor, or now I'm the female gay professor. It's super nice to have one of those, so I tick all the boxes. But a couple of years back, I was asked to do a HR workshop for the Baghdad police. And I've worked a lot with police organizations, and I find them fascinating. I love them, and I would love to go. And then when I was a little worried about going to Baghdad, and then they said, oh, no worries. We do thorough checkups, and we will make sure that everyone has your security, first and foremost. And I was thinking, shit, it takes one Google and image Google me, and it's my wife and me covered in glitter at Pride, kissing, because that's also one of the things I do for my organization here. And it's just realizing I can't make sure that people will actually think that I deserve to live, even if they're police officers in certain countries. So, long story short, so that kind of identity exercise is so, important and something everyone can do everywhere. Before meetings, at events, in order to, make visible, not because everyone should make the invisible categories visible, because it should be voluntary whether people want to come out or not. But I mean, to consider, particularly for the norm, what it means to suddenly feel uncomfortable around these categories, because I was at an event last week where I led this workshop, and there was a triple minority woman, a woman of color, a lesbian, and also a female leader, and then her boss, which was white, male, and straight, and everything. And he was like, "Oh, this exercise is really difficult." And she was like, "No, it's not." Because she's considered these categories forever. He had never considered them. So it's also, shifting to the majority, these kind of exercises, because that's how you change culture. You don't change culture by looking at the minority, because then it's, "I include you. You're welcome in my club." But it's also, what is that club made of? In queer studies, we talk about what's the closet made of. So it's not whether you're in the closet or out of the closet, but why is that closet even a closet?
Very interesting. And I would love to ask you more questions, but we're running out of time now. But we really appreciate both of you being here today. It's been very interesting to hear both about your research and your story, Anja. And so if anyone who is seeing the live stream, we really appreciate all of the people that has been tuning in. And if you're more interested in what we do, please go follow Female Leadership Academy, and remember to sign up for our academy, which is October 4th latest. So thank you very much.